Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. Great piece of sturgeon. There was a delivery just this morning. Michael, you have to punish the thief. It's just not possible anymore. With these words, the receptionist left the office. Slamming the door one last time. Well, not so much slamming it, just not bothering to hold it. All in all, not much difference. That's great. After all, he knew about the peculiarities of doors and consequently exactly the effect he had hoped for. With employees like that, Michael was beginning to wonder who the owner of the restaurant was. In theory, he should be the one shouting, cursing, and demanding, finding the culprits. Nevertheless, the manager was right about something. Food was indeed disappearing, and from the very refrigerator where the most expensive and valuable ingredients were kept. Just last week, 2 pieces of marbled beef disappeared. Even earlier, caviar, salmon, and a bundle of rare herbs, specially brought from Asia for the chef's signature dish. In general, not very serious. They took little by little discreetly, almost without interfering with the work of the restaurant. Another man might not have paid much attention to it, but Michael had learned in the army to be as attentive to such things as possible. Besides, he'd been a chef himself, and God forbid he'd start to lose food in those conditions. So in his own restaurant, he kept the same approach. And it was just a shame that there was a thief among the employees. He treated everyone well, paid decent wages, and if any problems arose, he could help out. There were a couple of times when cooks went to him and lent him rather decent money. He listened to everyone and never refused anyone. Perhaps this attitude was due to the fact that he himself was from a poor family. Dad worked as a driver. Mom was a midwife. They might have wanted to help their son, but had no such opportunity. So he had to achieve everything in life by his own efforts, and it must be said, quite successfully. As a teenager, he began to engage in some part-time work. Flyers handed out or ran as a courier or a part-time loader. No work he was not afraid of. He gave half of his salary to his parents. Already at that time, he understood that they needed his help. The rest of the money he was saving. I was going to enroll in a medical school but failed. I failed chemistry. He was drafted into the army. Life there did not seem too hard to him, maybe luckily, but he did not notice any special signs of hazing. He calmly served his time and then decided to continue under contract and spent a few more years in the army. There, in the end, they noticed some of his fondness for cooking, put him to work as a cook, and he coped with his duties well. At least they didn't complain about his cooking. They even praised it. In fact, after the last person who'd held the job, any meal would probably have seemed heavenly. There was always salted, undercooked, or something else that went wrong. But it was none of his business. He just did not like cooking, and he could not replace it, so they ate what they were given. Several times Michael renewed the contract, and then somehow got tired of the barracks life, wanted to move on. Probably wished more independence, to live not by the rules, but as he wanted. In addition, although paid in the army and a lot, but you should always strive for more. Over the years of service he earned a lot, but he had very little money to spend. So by the time he was discharged, he had quite an impressive sum of money, just enough to try and open a small business. Of course, he decided to do what he was passionate about and what he knew how to do. He opened a restaurant, or more precisely, a small eatery at first. There, he took orders himself and cooked. Customers had to pick up their own food, and sometimes they had to wait a long time for it to be cooked. And yet there were many people who wanted to visit the place. First of all, he was really quite good. Cooked. And secondly, at the initial stage, the owner positioned his cafe that way. Mystery Army food, cooked and served by a former military chef, a kind of attraction that turned out to be interesting to quite a few people. After only a year of this kind of work, the man was able to hire additional staff, a couple of waiters, and an assistant chef. He invested most of his profits in the business, and it paid off. A little later, he managed to rent a more prestigious place for the establishment, and from a cafe, it slowly began to turn into a real restaurant. After a while, the staff of waiters increased, and a professional chef appeared. The owner himself was now engaged exclusively in administrative work, making arrangements for food supplies, overseeing their quality, hiring new employees, paying salaries and bonuses. In general, everything in Michael's life was going well. Business flourished. The restaurant grew and developed. A year ago, I even had to look for a good administrator because it was already difficult to cope with all the work. Of course, the man did not forget to help his parents all this time. He married again a couple of years ago to a good woman, but she was too young, a few years younger than he was. He wanted children, but she didn't need them yet. Michael didn't push much and understood that she needed some time. After all, she might not be completely used to her new status yet, but that was all lyricism. But who carried the groceries was the real question, and the restaurant owner had no exact answer to it. But it seemed that everyone else had one. Almost all staff was sure that the thief was a new dishwasher, very young, and looked even younger. It was as if there had never been such an outrage in the restaurant before her. So she was to blame. But Michael was sure that the attitude toward this girl was very prejudiced, and even before this whole story with the products, the staff, especially the administrator for some reason, did not like her, though it was absolutely unclear why she deserved it. She behaved modestly, even shyly. No conflicts with anyone. She did her work as it should be done. However, only an elderly cook showed her friendliness, even began to allow to bring her son to work, a 5-year-old boy whom she had absolutely no one to leave. Perhaps that child was the reason for her dislike of the dishwasher. No, he behaved quietly and even modestly like his mother, did not interfere with anyone else's work. So Michael was not against it, that he sat in a corner in the kitchen and quietly collected the designer, or otherwise entertained himself, but the staff, and then whispered behind the newcomer. Look, such a young woman, and already a mother. How old is she when she gave birth to him? Alone raising him, poor thing, of course. Probably does not even know who the father is. And her parents must have been the same way. They gave birth drunk, and then the children suffer. Now she works as a dishwasher. She could have studied and got a profession. Michael, like the cook, was not so categorical. It depends on what circumstances in life led this girl to find herself in such a situation. She should be pitied and helped, not judged. Nevertheless, he had no other options as to who could steal. He could not think of his old employees, all of whom he had worked with for quite a long time. And so it turned out there were no other suspects. However, the owner of the restaurant already had an idea how to expose the thief. Unobtrusively, for all, he decided to set the fridge surveillance, a small camera, which was to work only if someone opens the door. So the next time someone thought of doing it again to steal the groceries, he would have a picture of this man. All the next week, he secretly checked the camera. It showed nothing suspicious. The refrigerator was opened by the cook, and his assistants took only the food they needed for cooking at that moment. In short, nothing suspicious. That was until Sunday came. As usual, when Michael checked the camera in the evening, he saw a child in the picture. True, nothing was missing from the refrigerator, which meant that the boy had only looked inside. Perhaps it was mere childish curiosity, but it could not be ruled out that he was looking to see what he could steal unnoticed later. The next morning, the restaurant owner summoned the dishwasher and the receptionist and showed them the photograph. So, how do you explain that your son was seen opening the door of the refrigerator, from which food is regularly missing? Well, clearly how, the receptionist interjected. He seemed to be about to add something else, but Michael gestured for him to stop, letting him know that now he intended to listen only to the dishwasher. And there were already tears in the woman's eyes. "My son was probably just playing around," shyly she suggested, curious about him. "He's a little boy. We didn't take anything, I swear. What's your marbled beef to us? I wouldn't know the difference between it and regular beef. If I wanted to steal, I'd take something easier that no one would notice, but I don't need to. We have enough money for food. And you check a purse." The administrator cut in again. "And in general, how do you know that it was beef that was missing today? Please show us the contents of your bag." Without any questions, she opened the bag and showed the men its contents. However, her confidence quickly dissipated when she saw their eyes, the bewildered look of the restaurant owner and triumphant at the manager. Turning the bag so that she could see what was inside, she was stunned. On top of all her belongings, in the most visible place, lay a piece of that very beef, carelessly wrapped in a bag. If the tears had only come out lightly before, now Emily was crying in earnest. "I don't know how it got in here," she sobbed. "I didn't take it. Why should I take it? What perfidy!" There was a touch of admiration in the receptionist's voice. To take advantage of a little child who, no doubt, cannot even understand what his mother is asking for, but still wants to please her. And if anything, you can pretend that you yourself didn't know about anything, and it's all just childish pranks. It's a genius scheme. Emily, bravo. Michael looked at the whole picture, not knowing what to think. Even after the proverbial meat was found in the girl's purse, he still couldn't believe that she could be a thief. Maybe the boy really was naughty. He'd probably only seen meat on holidays, so he wanted a piece. How would he know how much it was worth? And someone else must be responsible for all the other disappearances. But there was no one else around the ill-fated fridge. The man even regretted that he had started this investigation, but there was no turning back now. All the evidence irrefutably pointed exactly to the dishwasher. "You're fired, Emily." Finally, he said after a prolonged silence, "Save the meat for yourself, to please yourself, to please your son. Anyway, it's no good for cooking in a restaurant, according to sanitary standards." It had been several days since that scene, and Michael couldn't get it out of his head. He couldn't get it out of his head that he had treated a young mother who had nowhere to go, and now probably had nothing to eat. He fired her. One day, no pay. Even if she did steal, she obviously didn't steal from a good life. Besides, he still didn't believe she could really do that. After all, his conscience had completely tormented him. He remembered that she had left her address when she applied for a job, picked up her papers, found it, and drove to her place after work. On the way, he stopped at the supermarket, bought some groceries and some cars for the boy. "I couldn't give back my salary officially, so at least let it be that way." The neighborhood turned out to be not rich, as expected. The single-type rows of old houses were familiar to the man from his own childhood. It wasn't without some difficulty that he found the house he wanted, went upstairs and rang the doorbell. After a while, he heard quiet footsteps and then a question. "Who's there?" "Emily, it's Michael, your former boss. We need to talk." She hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door. He saw a small vestibule with scanty repairs, but clean and neat. Emily gestured for him to come in. He immediately handed her a bag of groceries, saying, "I suggest we consider it a gesture of reconciliation." The hostess was visibly surprised, but accepted the packages. While she carried them into the kitchen and unloaded them, Michael managed to undress and walk inside the apartment. On his way out of the bathroom, he ran into little Alex. In the boy's hands, he noticed a new typewriter. "Thank you, Uncle Michael." "Thank you, Uncle Michael," said the kid, lifting the toy higher, apparently to show him exactly what he was thanking him for. "You come in?" came a voice from the kitchen. "You'll excuse the mess in here. The apartment is rented." I still can't clean up the consequences of the previous tenant's stay. From the point of view of the restaurant owner, there was not much of a mess. Yes, there were some toys lying around, but that's not surprising when you have a small child in the apartment. And the fact that the repairs were rudimentary, what can you do about it without money, and even in a rented apartment? In some bewilderment, he made his way to the kitchen. She pointed to a simple but good-looking chair next to the same table. The latter was covered in oilcloth with some kind of abstract floral design. Apparently, it was used as a tablecloth for the hostess. A steaming kettle and 2 cups were already on top of it. "Would you like some tea? We really don't have any sugar. But we have the candy you brought. Quite a substitute." Michael mentally berated himself for not thinking to buy something as simple as sugar. On the other hand, it never occurred to him that such basic products might not be in the house. He kept picking up different goodies: meat, fruit, candy. And maybe he should have added a few more packs of trivial cereals to the mix. "Of course I will. Thank you," Chuckles. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Emily asked as they began to drink tea. "To tell you the truth, I wanted to apologize. I don't believe that you or your son could just steal from everyone under their noses like that. I shouldn't have fired you." "I can understand you too," said the girl. "As for the boy, I can see why everyone thought he was my son. But he isn't. Actually, he is my nephew, my oldest sister's child. She and her husband died in an accident when he was 2 years old. They were hit by a drunk driver, right to the death. By the way, do you know who was driving the car?" Michael took a big sip of tea. He had already guessed what the answer to that question would be, but he shook his head in the negative. "Is the manager yours?" "I didn't even recognize him when I first came to the restaurant. But he remembered me, I think. That's why he didn't like me, and even managed to turn the whole staff against me. Of course, it was to his advantage to get me fired. He probably thought that I would now start to tell everyone what had happened. But why should I? He got his punishment, and I have to think about how to raise a child on his feet." Michael became as clear as possible everything that had happened in the restaurant lately. Without fear, the administrator was stealing in order to set up the poor girl. There was a reason why he had not wanted to hire this man a year ago. Intuition, I guess. His documents were all in order, so there was no reason not to hire him, and he worked well afterwards. The restaurant owner was even ashamed that he was so distrustful of the man, but it turned out this way. "You know, come to the restaurant tomorrow. I'll reinstate you from your position, and the administrator, as it seems, will have to find a new one." Her face literally lit up. "It is clear that she needs a job, at least some, and have to pay the rent and feed the baby. Thank you." And so we parted. The boss quietly drove home, no longer feeling the stone that lay in his heart all these days. Emily, in turn, went to bed early so she would not be late for work the next day. Neither of them had any idea that they were both already late. However, despite the fact that she went to bed early, she could not fall asleep. She tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a comfortable position. But it was, of course, not the way she lay down. The conversation with her boss had awakened old memories that were now creeping into her head, keeping her awake. She remembered her distant childhood, when it seemed that all roads were open, that only happiness reigned in the world, and it would always be so, that her parents and beloved little sister would always be there. The girl has often noticed that her peers do not get along with the older children of their parents, but she and Julia were lucky. Perhaps it was the right upbringing. Father and mother had made sure that neither of their daughters felt abandoned or unwanted, and did not feel jealous of the other. The character of both girls probably played a role as well. Gentle, friendly, non-confrontational. It was much more interesting for them to do something together rather than quarrel over nothing. In addition, Julia was very much waiting for her little sister. Parents worked hard to provide a better life for their girls, and she was often lonely. She wanted someone to play with and talk to all the time. When Emily came along, her 5-year-old sister volunteered to help her parents with the baby. Of course, nothing serious was entrusted to her. Mostly she just played with the baby, calmed her when she was naughty, sometimes fed and dressed her. Many years later, she told her youngest that perhaps it was then that she realized how much she loved to babysit and how much she wanted her own. When Emily grew up, Julia did not lose interest in her. On the contrary, she was very happy that now she and her sister could play something more serious and even talk. Even her first word was little sisters instead of imomrabadidad. Parents were not offended. On the contrary, glad that the girls are so close. Julie herself took her sister to school and took her away from there, helped her with her homework, listened to all the sorrows and difficulties, and tried to support her as much as she could. She never gave her little sister any harm, neither to her peers nor to older children. The girls had a particularly good time in the summer at the country house, where they could run around the woods and fields all day long. I would carry apples from the abandoned property, sneak away from my parents to buy chips and other unhealthy things that were not good for my stomach, and also to sit for hours on the old grass and tree foundations and talk about everything. It seemed like it would go on forever. But when Emily was 12 years old, fate dealt the sisters their first blow. Their mother was diagnosed with the last stage of cancer. No treatment could save her any longer, only to alleviate her suffering as much as possible. 2 years later, she was gone. The whole family grieved this loss, but most of all the father. In fact, as the sisters realized later, he had never been able to cope with the grief, but for their sake, he still hung on to this world. However, when the younger sister had just entered college and the older sister was finishing her last year of college, he was gone. The sisters were left alone. Even the fact that the older sister had a boyfriend who was a classmate did not impede their intimacy. A year later, they got married. A year later, they had a baby boy. The older sister was absolutely happy when she finally had her long-awaited child. Emily often stopped by to visit them. She did not find fiddling with the little boy particularly exciting, but she had nothing against it either. And to help her favorite little sister was always a real pleasure for her. So she sometimes sat with Alex, letting her just be alone and quiet. On the day that the drunken receptionist hit her husband's sister to death, Emily sat with the baby too. She let the young parents enjoy each other's company. They were supposed to go to the movies, to see some movie they had both spotted in the posters a long time ago, but they never made it home. They died in their own backyard. At that moment, the girl's heart stabbed, and Alex, who had been sleeping peacefully until then, cried loudly. It was as if both felt what had happened even before they knew it. However, the boy had not yet learned all about it, for he was too young to understand such things. This tragedy took Emily not only from the closest person, but also from her hopes for any future, because she never had time to finish school, and now there was no more time for that. She had a child in her arms who had no one but her. On the other hand, now she had no one but that boy, and he was, as it were, a piece of her sister, a reminder that she had once lived in this world. Of course, the girl couldn't think of giving him up to an orphanage. No, she had to raise this child and give him the best she could. For a while, she still tried to combine education with raising the baby, but it turned out to be impossible. She, of course, had worked part-time before, but she also received tremendous support from her sister and her husband. For example, they paid for her rented apartment. Of course, it was not very convenient, but she firmly said, "The main thing for you now is to study well and get a profession. When you get on your feet, then you'll play independently. We are not poor," her husband supported her. Now she needed money, not only for the apartment because it had been sold in an attempt to save her mother, but she needed something to eat to feed her nephew, buy him clothes, diapers, and everything else. Needless to say, she was never able to find a part-time job that paid well enough, even though she had moved into a room in the suburbs, with no repairs and almost no amenities. There wasn't even a washing machine, let alone anything else. Besides, she had to be with the baby at all times now. That made it difficult to study and look for work, and she hardly had time for sleep. After 6 months of such anguish, she gave up and left the institute. Got a variety of low-level jobs, often changing jobs, until, eventually, she got a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant. The salary there was much higher than in similar positions. In addition, the owner was not embarrassed by the fact that I often have to take Alex with me when I have no one to leave him with. Finally, after scrolling through the memories to this point, the girl managed to fall asleep. The sleep, however, was disturbing, restless, and very clear. It was as if she felt that life was preparing a new steep turn for her, though she could not yet understand what it would be. The next day, the girl went to the restaurant in high spirits. The anxious thoughts that had overtaken her in the evening were forgotten. She was simply glad that her boss had agreed to listen to her and had acted justly in reinstating her. Anybody else probably wouldn't have taken the case. The boss, however, was not there. Moreover, the place was cordoned off, and police officers were everywhere. No one would let her in. However, after she stood around for a while, she roughly understood what was going on here. The police had drawn up some documents that showed serious irregularities, and, judging by their conversations, some very silly ones, as if no one had even tried to cover their tracks, but had deliberately left everything in the most conspicuous place. Michael was arrested on this occasion, and the business of the restaurant was now handled by the manager. After a while, the police did leave, and all the colleagues who had piled up outside the building were able to get to work. The girl went in with them, not even knowing what she hoped for, because if this man was in charge now, he would never take her back to work. But to her surprise, she was wrong. "All right," he said when he saw the girl, "you can keep doing the dishes if you can't do anything else. But if anyone ever hears from you that I don't like, you're out of here like a cork, and I make sure you can't get a job anywhere else." Michael, meanwhile, had bigger problems than he had anticipated. Not only was there a tax fraud in the restaurant, but the police also found some documents in his house proving that this was supposedly not the first time he had done this kind of fraud. Who could have set him up like this? Michael had no idea. Only his wife could have planted the papers at home. But why would she do that? No, they had certain disagreements, of course, but not serious enough to even divorce, let alone ruin a man's life and put him in jail for money. So she wasn't from a poor family herself. She owned some assets. Of course, you can never have a lot of money. That's understandable. But still, she did not give the impression of someone who, for the sake of material possessions, was capable of doing such nefarious thing. The trial passed more like a farce. No one was particularly anxious to get to the bottom of what had happened. All attempts by Michael to justify himself somehow were not taken seriously. And to tell the truth, he saw no way to prove his innocence. As a result, he got 12 years in prison. You might say he was lucky. He could have been sentenced to 25 years under the article he was charged with. He never saw his wife during the trial. He thought maybe it was for the best. After all, she could have been hurt by the showdown. Maybe her parents had advised her to keep a low profile until everything was sorted out. But for the next 6 months that he was already in a cell, she never once went to see him. Emily, meanwhile, continued to work in the restaurant. You'd think that wasn't her best decision. Perhaps another would have quit a long time ago. Her former manager had cut her pay considerably, and at every opportunity he made caustic comments about her, enjoying his permissiveness. But there was one consideration that did not give her peace. She really wanted to help her former boss, who had treated her inhumanly. But she had no idea how to do it, but she knew for sure that everything that was going on was the work of the current boss. and therefore it was necessary to be near him to be able to get some information. And her plan finally succeeded. She noticed that the former receptionist often left the restaurant in the company of a certain young woman, and sometimes she was alone with her in the former boss's office. On one such day, she managed to overhear what was going on between these two. Just as the girl suspected, she turned out to be the boss's wife. Without hesitation, the two were discussing how he had skillfully set up the former owner of the restaurant, and what a good life they would have now that he could no longer interfere with their happiness together. What to do with the information received, the girl did not know. She had no evidence in her hands. And what was worse, she had no idea where to find them. And what in general in this case can be considered evidence, to hire a good lawyer. But where could she get the money? So she had only one thing to do, to tell Michael herself. Maybe he would have some ideas. And besides, someone should open the man's eyes to the betrayal of his wife. In general, it is clear, but for sure the restaurant owner still trusts his wife. For a long time, she pounded the doorsteps of various instances to still allow her to meet with the former chef. No one understood why it was necessary. She is not a wife, not a relative. It is not supposed, and that's it. In the end, not believing herself that she was doing it, the girl decided to take the ploy. She said that Alex was her son, Michael. Come into the situation. The boy really wants to see his father. You see, we were never officially married, so I can't prove anything. But he always communicated with the child, never forgot about him. And now Alex doesn't understand why he can't see his dad anymore. The ruse worked, and the woman and her nephew were allowed to see Michael, bypassing all the rules, but were warned that their time was strictly limited. 5 minutes and not a second more. The former owner of the restaurant was very surprised to see Emily with Alex in front of him when he was told that he was summoned for a date. He assumed that it was his wife who could finally get out and visit him. Emily, what are you doing here? Especially with Alex. I'm sorry, but I don't think this is the right place for a child, although I certainly appreciate you coming to see me. There's no time to explain, she said hurriedly. We have only 5 minutes, so please, let's not waste them. You may not believe what I'm about to tell you, but you better try, for your fate may depend upon it. You have been set up by your wife and our precious administrator. And I'm afraid she's cheating on you with him too. I overheard them talking in the restaurant. That's how I know about all this. Michael felt bad. He had not expected his wife to betray him, even though she was the only person he could think of who would plant incriminating evidence in their shared apartment. He was ready to consider the most improbable versions of how it happened, but to the last he did not want to believe in the treason of his beloved woman. However, he was also well aware that the dishwasher had no reason at all to come here and lie to him, and that it was unlikely she would do such a thing unless she herself was 100% sure of the accuracy of her information. But why? I don't understand. Is this all just about money and owning the restaurant? After all, I hadn't done anything wrong to any of them. That's not the most important thing right now, Emily said. The important thing is this. We need proof of what happened so we can get you out of here. That's why I'm here. Do you know any lawyers you could at least consult? No lawyers, said Michael thoughtfully. And I can't afford to pay someone either, as you understand, but he quickly wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to the girl. Here, this is my father's number. He has an old journalist friend who works for a criminal newspaper and does all sorts of investigations. He's the only one to go to with a case like this. It would be good if he could find out why those two men disliked me so much. That was the end of the date. Emily went home. The next day was her day off, and she could take care of her boss's business. She called his father and briefly outlined the situation. They arranged a meeting, and in the morning she went to the home of the former boss's parents, leaving Alex in the care of a neighbor. As it turned out, during the evening, Peter not only found the contacts of an old friend, but also arranged to meet him. So when Emily got to the place, The man was already waiting for her there. Thoroughly questioning the girl, he wrote down everything she knew about the administrator. She did not know much, of course, but she was able to tell her some things. The journalist ran his eyes over his notes once more, and then fell silent for a long time, perhaps contemplating how exactly he would conduct an investigation, and perhaps trying to understand if there was anything else that could help him in this case. Anyway, in the end, he asked Emily to call him back in a couple of weeks. Frankly, the girl doubted that it made sense to dig into the administrator's past. She was sure she should concentrate on the present, on the search for evidence, because it was clear enough that what drove this man, the desire for power and money. However, it soon became clear that she was not quite right. The journalist called her himself, even ahead of schedule. They agreed to meet at a diner near her home. Emily got there almost an hour earlier, ordered herself a cup of the cheapest tea, and sat there like on needles. When, at last, her companion appeared, the drink was already cold, but she did not even touch it, so great was the excitement. A professional eye evaluated the state of the girl. A not yet a young journalist said, Let's start with what worries you most of all. I have weighty evidence for the court that the papers on the basis of which the boss was put in jail were completely faked, plus real documents for persuasion. But listen to what else I've been able to dig up. As he told her, the girl's eyes became more and more round. Nevertheless, the journalist dug up some papers proving that everything he was talking about was not a figment of his sick imagination. For the administrator had a motive for revenge against Michael, which from some point of view could even be called quite valid if, of course, one turns a blind eye to the fact that the young man himself was far from sinless, and also the fact that children are not responsible for the sins and mistakes of their parents. And was there a mistake, or was there simply no other way out? Also a good question. The childhood of Nicholas, the administrator's name, was not an easy one. His mother died during childbirth. He could not tell anymore whether the doctor made a mistake somewhere or the situation was really that desperate, but only one of them could survive, either the woman or the baby. As it turned out, he was the only one who survived. He ended up in the care of his father, who had no idea what to do with such small children. In addition, the death of his wife, from which he was never able to recover from. For some years, he managed his parenthood with some difficulty, even though he drank regularly. But with time, alcohol and inconsolable grief did their evil work. He spent more and more time on the bottle and less time on his child, who by that time was only 5 years old, so the boy had to become both a nurse and a psychologist for his father himself. He went to the store by himself, cooked some simple meals by himself, made sure his father didn't choke in his own vomit after another big drink of vodka. And of course he was always listening to the midwife who had ruined his mother. He firmly understood, even then, at a young age, that she was the cause of all his troubles. His father did not live long and died in the process of another drinking spree. Little Nicholas had no relatives left, and he ended up in an orphanage. Already there, he showed himself as an extremely cruel and cynical person, making fun of other children, robbed them of their toys and sweets. By his 15th birthday, the boy had become a real nightmare for both the orphanage residents and his caretakers. He could easily get into a fight, even with an adult, if he did not like something. At the same time, the boy thought he had every right to do all these terrible things. After all, from his point of view, he was the most offended, the most miserable person in the whole world. Nicholas didn't like it when other children cried. He thought that they had no reason to do so. A new apartment from the state, tried to study somewhere, work somewhere, but did not stay long in any place because he could not get along with the staff. In addition, he was not particularly punctual, could be late for work or might not show up at all. He also had problems with alcohol. Perhaps This was the result of the fact that he saw from the example of the Pope that it could partly help him cope with life's problems. He knew of no other way. It almost led him to the same end as his father. But then the very same accident happened when he drove drunk and killed 2 people, Emily's sister and her husband. Yes, and he also left their young child orphaned. At the time, he got off lightly, lost his license, and got a year's probation. But that incident made him think about what he was doing with his life, because the next time things could have ended much more miserably for him. He gave up alcohol and even found a full-time job as a receptionist in a restaurant, not yet at the one Michael ran. Tardiness and absenteeism stopped. Even Nicholas no longer had any particular conflicts with the staff. Although he kept apart from the others, he was sort of on his own, but he no longer confronted them openly. It was because a new idea had taken hold of his mind. He decided that he had to find out why his life had gone wrong at an early age. That is, the very midwife who had so unsuccessfully delivered his mother. He devoted 2 more years to this task. The search was complicated by the fact that the records in his childhood were poorly kept and not all the papers have been preserved after all these years. Besides, who would just give out internal information about a hospital to an outsider, even if all he wanted was a detail as small as the name of the doctor who had worked on a certain day 25 years earlier? Somewhere he had to act with cunning and persuasion, somewhere to solve the issue with money. Finally, he found out the name of the midwife who had delivered his mother in labor. She turned out to be Michael's mother. From there, it was not difficult to find out that she had a family, including her only and surely beloved son. So he made up his mind. The journalist finished his story, what a great idea it would be to break his life. And his mother kind of let him watch and suffer. "The bastard," the girl blurted out. "It wasn't enough for him to take my sister's life. He was a vigilante, a fighter for justice." "Yeah," agreed the journalist. "Anyway, now we have all the evidence and real documents and photos of the sweet couple. They will not escape responsibility." "And what about the wife?" Emily looked up. "What does she need all this for?" The man shrugged. "Who knows about her? I couldn't find anything about her that would indicate a motive. Maybe it's feelings. The girl's still young. He must have seduced her, tricked her. Or maybe he also scared her that she couldn't get away from him that easily. She, foolishly naive, believed him." Emily's version seemed quite plausible. But either way, a new trial had to be initiated. Michael's parents collected money from friends and acquaintances for a good lawyer. Like, when the restaurants would return all the seized assets, then we would settle accounts. The lawyer was advised by a journalist who had contacts with representatives of this profession. He helped with the investigation and provided a discount for his services when he learned the details of the case. The evidence gathered was enough for Michael to be acquitted on all charges and released from prison. The restaurant was once again at his complete disposal, a fact of which all the employees were unspeakably happy. Nicholas might have been a good administrator, but he was not a very good host. It took a few months to put things in order after his management, and to return customers who had fled because of the deteriorating service and scandals associated with the arrest of the owner. The restaurant owner did not forgive his wife. Although she tried to return to him, he filed for divorce. "How could I trust you after what you did?" he asked. "How can I live with you under one roof to raise common children?" "I understand, my love. I am so guilty. Maybe you can forgive me in time." "Maybe I can," he sighed. "But I will not forget, and I will still be waiting for a catch from you. And we mustn't live like this. It won't make anyone feel better. We'll only torture each other. Don't worry. You'll find another suitable man." At the same time, there was another trial, this time of 2 crooks who had decided to put an innocent man behind bars and steal his property. Surprisingly, Nicholas got away with it again. Both he and his accomplice received sizable, but only suspended sentences. However, the former administrator punished himself because in seeking to ruin someone else's life, he broke his own. Who would hire him after this case? But the final straw was the meeting with Michael's mother after the trial. They ran into each other on the way out of the building. What? Old woman, did your son punish the villain? And who will give me back the mother you killed? Maybe if she had stayed alive, my life would have gone completely differently. Understand that no one is to blame for your poor mother's death. I remember the accident. It wasn't a hard labor. The baby, I mean you, didn't come out right, and they brought her in late. She could not have survived. It wasn't the doctor's fault. My colleagues told me later. What was the story? The administrator didn't understand. I wasn't at the hospital that day, and I didn't deliver your mother's baby, but my colleague did. Why are you lying to me? I saw the schedule with my own eyes. You were working that day. I was supposed to work, but my father got sick, so I went to help him. I took time off work. I made an appointment for a sub for me. Nicholas was stunned when he realized that all his plans, all the actions he had taken so diligently the whole previous year, had been in vain. He was trying to get revenge on the wrong person. Yes. And besides, according to Michael's mother, it appeared that there was no one to take revenge on at all, and that his mother's death was not even a medical error. Worse, in fact, he himself had killed her. Though, of course, it was strange to make such a claim on a newborn. Michael, on the other hand, went on with his favorite business. Things in the restaurant were not going well after being run by the con man. To straighten it all out, the businessman needed a new savvy administrator, and he already had someone in mind who would be perfect for the job. Emily, he said to the dishwasher one day after his shift, couldn't I? What would you say if I offered you the position of restaurant administrator? Oh, said the girl, scared. You what? I mean, I have no experience in this business. I have no idea what the job is all about. But as recent events have shown, you know how to negotiate with people, and the right contacts can find and be able to work with documents. The rest is just details. I can send you to the course where everything will be explained to you in detail. That's the deal. In just a couple of months, Emily learned everything she needed to know as an administrator. Strangely enough, she loved the job. She helped the owner to cope with the mess that left behind a former administrator and lead the place to prosperity again. Sometimes the two of them stayed in the restaurant for a long time after all the other employees had left, checked documents, brought in order the electronic databases, developed various schemes to optimize important processes, searched for new suppliers, and reconnected with the old ones. The time they spent together did not go in vain. They became close and first good friends and then a couple. In addition, Michael really liked Alex, who was always somewhere close to them during their work. The sympathy was mutual. The man often spoiled the boy with some gifts, either toys or sweets. Emily had long regarded the boy as his mother. Of course, she was going to tell him the truth someday, but she saw no point in spoiling the child's childhood with such gruesome revelations. But the day he first called the man Papa, as they realized that it seemed to be heading toward a wedding. One day, to everyone's surprise, Nicholas stopped by the restaurant. Quietly and inconspicuously, he passed by the kitchen to the owner's office and found there, as he had hoped, the couple animatedly discussing some new dishes that should be added to the menu, as well as the possible referral of the cook to a refresher course in this regard. When they saw the named guest, both fell silent and dumbfounded. The man instinctively covered his girlfriend, not unreasonably fearing a trick on the part of the former administrator. However, as it turned out, their alarm was false. Nicholas looked at them intently and sadly, but showed no signs of aggression. Finally, he said, My friends, I owe you an apology for all the evil I have done, above all to Emily, for ruining her sister and leaving her child an orphan. So, of course, for treating her further. And to Michael for seducing his wife, trying to take away his restaurant, and ruining his life. Forgive me, friends. I am deeply sorry for my past actions. Was it the last thing one would expect from such a man? Neither Emily nor Michael knew how to respond to something like this. Both of them had the feeling that there was a catch in all this, some other cunning scheme that would result in the imminent collapse of the couple. Suppose we did forgive you, the man began cautiously. So what's next? What do you want? Money? A job? The receptionist job is taken, if you know what I mean. The receptionist job is taken, if you know what I mean. But if it's too bad for you, I can offer you a janitor's job. We're just looking for someone. One could suspect schadenfreude in this offer, but the businessman spoke quite sincerely. He really could not offer Nicholas anything else, but he was ready, if he had such serious problems in his life that he even decided to come to his former boss to give him some income. I don't need that, Nicholas retorted. The mundane doesn't interest me anymore. I'm getting ready to take the priesthood. I want to become a monk to atone for my sins for the rest of my life. I don't need anything from you except forgiveness, if you can find room in your souls for it. There was a rather long pause. They saw that the former administrator seemed to be speaking quite sincerely. He must really have realized that he had ruined his own life and almost taken a few others with him. And now he was remorseful and wanted to try to atone for what he had done. In the end, both assured him that they harbored no malice or other bad feelings toward him. You don't have to poison yourself with resentment about the past and regret, Emily told him. What's happened is happened. I forgive you. And he left. As soon as the door closed behind him, the businessman suddenly laughed. What are you up to? Emily asked. And he did not say anything about the products. Stealing is also a grave sin, wasn't it? At first, she didn't even know what the man was talking about. With all this going on, she had somehow forgotten how the story began. But when she realized what was being said, it was her turn to laugh. But for the groceries, she finally said, he really had nothing to do with it. He only took that piece of beef he slipped into my purse, and the rest is a completely different story. What kind of story? Michael wondered. Why do you know about it and I don't? Because they told me, and you don't. The woman snorted. In fact, I promised you wouldn't find out. So first tell me you're not going to punish anyone or bring it up at all. It's a long time ago, and the man has reformed and repented. Okay, so after I became an administrator, one of our waiters came to me. I will not say who, and it does not matter. Came to apologize for getting me fired because of him. He said he was the one who was stealing it. He was in trouble. He had lost a lot of money at cards. He just hadn't paid his wages. Everybody, of course, knew that you could borrow money. But it's one thing to pay for his sick mother's treatment, and another to pay off a gambling debt, you know. So he started to sell it little by little, and to sell expensive products to the stores. He said he tried to do it in such a way that it did not cause much damage to the restaurant. If it hadn't been for your army habits, I don't think anybody would have noticed anything. Gee, said the man with a chuckle. I hope that waiter doesn't play cards anymore. He says he's been out of the business ever since. Personally, I believe him. Sounds like the guy's really ashamed of what he did. Besides, I'm keeping an eye on him now, just in case. All right then, let him do his job, he decided. A year later, the couple got married. They decided to celebrate in their own restaurant, inviting his entire staff in addition to his parents and friends. Emily, by that time, had gone from mere administrator to co-owner of the business. And not just because she was the lover of the owner. She proved herself as a talented manager, and in many ways thanks to her they were able to afford the expansion, and in the near future were going to open another establishment. The management of this new restaurant was to fall entirely on the fragile shoulders of the girl. She was worried. Her newfound husband, on the other hand, had no doubts that she would succeed. Micah's parents accepted their daughter-in-law as their own. They had never forgotten that she had helped their son at a time when everybody had turned their backs on him. Alex became their beloved grandson, even though he was not their son's own child. They gladly looked after the boy while his guardians were at work. Another important task for the new dad was sending the boy to first grade. The boy was intrigued by the prospect of something new and unusual. School so far seemed to him to be some kind of elite place where only adults are allowed. And he was full of enthusiasm, but his parents, and it didn't matter that they weren't his parents, were very worried about how his adaptation to the new conditions would go. As it turned out, the excitement was completely in vain. The boy quickly found friends among his classmates, which he was incredibly happy about. There were no problems with his grades either. All subjects were given to him easily, and teachers could not rejoice in his exemplary behavior. The newlyweds thought about whether they should have another child. First, to go through all the stages of parenthood on their own, and second, the son recently began to actively ask for a brother. And the woman, remembering her warm relationship with her sister, thought it was a really good idea. Meanwhile, Nicola had gone into religion in earnest. First, he visited all the people he had ever wronged and somehow managed to earn their forgiveness. And then he withdrew from the world to some forgotten monastery, put on a monk's robe, and began to atone for his sin. By this he meant not only constant fasts and prayers, though of course he did not do without them. At first he rebuilt the ruined monastery on his own. He spent days sawing, whittling, nailing, and screwing. Over time, other people who, for one reason or another, had decided to retire from all worldly things joined him. Soon the building was fully restored and inhabited. After that, an additional building was rebuilt, in which an orphanage was organized at the man's initiative. Remembering his own childhood, the man tried to do everything to ensure that his foster children did not feel abandoned and lonely, and he firmly suppressed any attempts to bully them. As for his mistress, she had no time to suffer long for her failed marriage. Immediately after the divorce, she tried to return to the administrator, and just with a grand new plan on how to take away from her ex-husband's restaurant and at the same time take revenge on him. He was no longer interested in this proposal. Then she, using the connections of her parents, changed her name and appearance, and then completely left the city and possibly the country. Of course, completely illegally, because every month she had to report to the local police department. She was put on an international wanted list, but so far there has been no trace of her. She's had no contact with her ex-husband or anyone else she knew. He hoped he would never hear from her again in the future. He hoped he would not hear from her again in the future,